Hello everybody. So today I'm going to show you how I make my delicious meatballs in tomato sauce. Now this is a recipe I've developed over many years and tried all kinds of different combinations and ingredients. And this is what I think is one of the best. I hope you're going to enjoy it too. So I'm going to start off with a pound of grass-fed organic ground hamburg, and I added a little bit of tomato sauce to that. I'm going to add just a little bit more. And this is just basically a whole tomatoes and the juice that's kind of sitting with them, and I'll be using the rest of that in my sauce later. So today I'm also going to use chicken hamburg. I found that the ground chicken actually gives it a nice balance and it makes them more tender. Some people like to use veal, but for personal reasons I just don't agree with that, and I don't like using veal. Hey, if you like using it, that's fine for you. But I found ground chicken or ground pork actually works pretty well too. But ground chicken seems to be a little healthier than pork, so I usually go with the chicken and the beef combination. It comes out really good. So what I'm going to do to that, I'm going to add about a half onion, which I've already kind of chopped up here. Okay, I'm going to save the rest of that for my sauce. And I'm going to add 2 eggs. So, there are different schools of thought on how to crack an egg, believe it or not. There is some debate on this. I've seen chefs say bang it on the table so you don't make too many cracks in the shell. But I found a nice sharp edge makes a clean break, and you don't get too many shells, and you open it from the opposite side from where you break it so you don't get the shells in your food. To this I'm also going to add a few other things. I'm going to add some Parmesan cheese. So probably about a 1/4 cup. And you notice that this cheese is shredded. And I like using the shredded because it does give a little texture to the meatballs and it doesn't completely dissolve when they cook, so you still get that extra Parmesan flavor. Fresh grated Parmesan cheese also works very well, and I've used that in the past. So what I'm also going to do is going to add some fresh basil, and I am just going to basically chiffonade, it's called chiffonade cut, and maybe one more cut beyond that to get it pretty fine. I mean, some people get really hung up on worrying about the stems, but the stems are edible. So yeah, I'll take out some of the stems, but I'm not going to get too overwhelmed, too worked up if I still have a little piece of stem in there. I'm going to add the fresh basil, and I'll be adding more of that to my sauce later. And of course we have some salt. You can use sea salt. I like Himalayan salt. And the way I do it, I just kind of coat the meat nice. That way you know it's going to be enough to make it taste good. What I also have is some fresh oregano. I'm going to add a new bottle here. So kids, don't do that at home. I'm going to add probably about a good tablespoon of oregano. Now you notice you don't have to add as much of the dried oregano as you would with the basil, because the dried spices have much more concentrated flavor. What you'll find is that the fresh herbs contain a lot more water, so you have to use more of them to get the same amount of taste. But the benefit is nothing substitutes fresh, right? That fresh taste. So let's see, what else am I going to add? Well, one of the things I've tried recently is I've added a little Kiefer, probably about a 1/4 cup. And the thing about the Kiefer is it actually seems to me that, my experience, that it makes the meat really tender, and it actually gives a little flavor to that sour flavor. So that's Kiefer. What else? I'm going to need our breadcrumbs too. And I like to use Panko breadcrumbs. Some people actually use bread and they'll soak milk in the bread, which is kind of similar to using Kiefer. Again, the Kiefer I think has a lot more taste. So you notice I'm using my hand to measure with, because I'm doing it so long I kind of get a good idea, but it's roughly going to be about a cup. A cup of Panko, good organic Panko breadcrumbs. And I think that's it. Yeah, so I'm going to mix this up really good. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually, I have my oven heated up to 350, and I'm going to actually bake these in the oven, which gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about that. Because some of the purist meatball makers, Italian meatball makers in Italy, and people I've talked to here in the States, feel like the traditional way should be to boil the meatballs. And that's fine, they do come out delicious, nice and tender. What I've found is that when you bake the meatballs, you get that umami, you get that extra flavor on the outside, that from the caramelization of all the beautiful meat and ingredients that you've added. And it does add a whole new flavor profile, not just to your meatballs, but also to your sauce, because that kind of infuses into the sauce, makes the sauce taste really good. So that's my take on that. It's also a way to speed things up too, because when you bake them in the oven, you've done most of the cooking, and then it's just a matter of having them simmer for maybe a half hour to an hour to get them really nice and tender and delicious and have a chance to absorb the sauce. So as you can see, I'm trying to mix this up pretty well. And of course, actually I did forget to add my garlic. So I'm going to add some fresh garlic as well. Good thing I caught that before it was too late, right? Just going to chop it up. Rough chop the garlic. And I'm using already peeled garlic that I got from the supermarket, or organic peeled, so it saves me a little time. And it's just about as good as, almost as good as the unpeeled, and saves you a little time. So add my garlic, and I'm going to save the rest of my garlic for my sauce later. So what I'm going to basically do now is I'm just going to form some meatballs onto a greased pan that I have right here, which I actually used the same pan yesterday to cook a beautiful pizza focaccia. I hope you had a chance to see that video. I'll have the link in the description, so if you haven't seen that yet, you can try and make a pizza focaccia. So let's get this mixed up. Try not to over mix it, but the thing is, since we're adding chicken, ground chicken, and it's so tender, it's not going to hurt you to, if you happen to over mix it a little bit. Just want to make sure it's combined pretty well. Now sometimes I'll use a ice cream scoop, so I want to have consistently sized meatballs. But today we're just going to estimate, and we'll probably get about a couple dozen meatballs out of this batch. So what I like to do too is when I'm making my meatballs is to coat my hands with just a little bit of olive oil. You don't have to use anything too fancy, just so the meat doesn't stick when you're forming the ball. So we're just going to make a nice, and it's up to you what size you want to make. If you're in the mood for having nice big juicy meatballs, make big juicy meatballs. If you want to make little ones, make little ones. The kids might like the little ones better. And how obvious benefit for the little ones is that they're going to cook a lot faster. So these ones that I'm making right now, they're going to be in the oven for about a half hour to 35 minutes. And once you get going, you get the feel for it. You start to get yourself in the groove, making the meatballs, and they get to be fairly consistent in size. Try not to crowd them too much, because then what happens is when you crowd them, they're not going to roast as well, and they might actually be steaming more than roasting. So this is why I'm trying to space them out a little bit. And going along very nicely. I can promise you these are going to be delicious. Now, one ingredient I have added in the past, which I didn't add this time, is Worcestershire sauce. That Worcestershire did give that kind of umami profile a little bit, a little extra taste, but I found just by roasting the meatballs, you don't really need the Worcestershire sauce. So here we go. We're doing really good. So the size I'm making right here, I'm going to get about actually a I misspoke, but it comes out pretty good there. That last one's gonna be pretty consistent with the other ones, I think. So looks like we got 12 good sized meatballs here. So in the interest of time, I made some fairly large ones so we can demonstrate how they're made. Okay, so I'll add them into the oven. And before I actually add it down, let's get a closer look at what those meatballs look like. Looking beautiful. They're gonna be delicious. So we'll come back and we'll test them out and see how they're looking. And while we're doing that, we're gonna make our sauce. Okay, now our meatballs are in the oven. We're gonna make some sauce. So I get the oven, the stove top going. I add a generous amount of good extra virgin olive oil. And I'm going to add some chopped garlic and onions. And also some fresh basil. And we're going to let that get nice and hot. Well, chef, you don't have a mise en place. So I always preach that when we're talking about my daughters about cooking. Mise en place, which is sort of a French way of saying everything in its proper place. In other words, you have everything prepped and ready to go. So when you need it, you don't have to look for it. And you don't burn your food, right? While you're trying to find the next ingredient. So we're going to get this stuff going here in the pan. And sometimes what I like to also do is add a little bit of tomato paste. And since I don't have tomato paste, I'm just going to add a little bit of the tomato that I had left over from earlier, the crushed whole tomatoes. And once that gets going, I'll bring it up to volume with a little water and some crushed tomatoes, good organic crushed tomatoes. So this is starting to get nice and hot. So you want to stir it and make sure you don't burn the garlic. And there's some fresh basil in there too, infuse a little more flavor. So as you can see now, the onions will become translucent and the garlic is cooked pretty well. Definitely want to watch the garlic because once you start to burn it, it's going to give it a little bitter taste to your sauce. So you don't want that. So you want to keep a close eye on it. At this point, we can add a little tomato paste, or I'm actually going to take a couple of whole tomatoes, crush them up and add them right in there. And if you can get that smell right now, you will be so happy. It's amazing. So the reason I like to add a little bit of tomato to the onions and garlic is it gives that tomato product a chance to caramelize a little bit and once again add a little more flavor profile to your sauce and make it delicious. I got that idea. I should give the credit to Maddie Matheson, who's one of my favorite chefs. So shout out to Maddie Matheson. Okay, so when you see that the sauce is pretty much evaporated, reduced down, nice and thick, you're getting happy. You see that even the caramelization in the pan a little bit. You can then go ahead and add the rest of your tomato product, whether that be a puree or whole tomatoes that you decided to puree yourself. I like to have some chunks in there. Sometimes I'll actually even add an extra can of diced tomatoes to give that little chunky effect, the delicious chunky sauce. And you can see the sauce is beautiful. Very nice color. We're going to add a little salt. Now, when I say a little, just kind of coat the top of the sauce. You got to get the feel for it when you've done it a few times. And we're going to keep it simple. That's going to be it. I'm just going to put it down to low. Get the rest of that sauce out of there. And we're going to wait for our meatballs, and then we'll put the meatballs into the sauce. Let them simmer for at least a half hour to an hour. And you'll see that they're going to be delicious. Okay, so my sauce has been simmering for about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's probably a good idea to check the seasoning at this point. Remind you, to always get from one of my favorite chefs, Admiral Lagasse. So you might think you added the right amount, but it's always a good idea to test it, and just keeping in mind when we're adding salt, you can always add more, but you can't take it away. So you want to try add a little bit, then if it needs more later on, you add more. So let's see how it tastes. That's really good. One of the things I also didn't get a chance to mention is I like to add a little bit of honey. It gives the sauce a little bit of the balance. Not too much, just a little hit. And now we're just going to let this sauce simmer while the meatballs are finishing in the oven. And it's going to be magnificent. Okay, so we're going to check our meatballs now. Looks like they're done. Oh yeah. Let's get a closer look at those and see how beautifully brown they are. It's all, all that flavor that's on the pan. We're going to try and get that into the sauce as well. So basically just add them right in to our sauce. Now what I didn't mention earlier is that sometimes what I'll do is use a piece of parchment paper if I want to save a little time on the cleanup, because then the meatballs won't stick to the pan. Obviously the pan will be much easier to clean. But the nice thing about using a pan versus a parchment is you can take all this beautiful caramelization. Let's take a look at that so you can see that it's all caramelized on the bottom. It's amazing flavors we might be losing if we let them stick to the parchment paper. So, we're getting close, and let me just say for those in the audience that if you were here, you would be blown away by the smell. The smell is amazing, delicious. Okay, so you can scrape a little of that flavor out if you want to. It's up to you. Get that worked into the sauce and just give it a little bit more flavor, a little taste. Now I'm just basically got to be careful not to break your meatball, so you don't want to go stirring vigorously, obviously. So I do just give it a little shake like that and just kind of move around a little bit so they each find a happy spot where they can get nice and delicious and soaked up with that sauce. And I would recommend at least a half hour, 45 minutes. The longer you go, the better actually. In fact, these will even taste better the next day because they have a chance to really soak up the sauce. But certainly, if you have the time, you can wait about an hour, let them simmer for an hour. If not, as I said, half hour to 45 minutes will be fine because the meatballs are essentially already cooked all the way through. Depends on how tender you want them to be. Alright, so we're going to just leave those to cook now. Okay, so our meatballs have been simmering for about an hour. Time to see how we did. Let's take a look. Oh yeah. A little extra sauce. And a little Parmesan cheese. And a little more sauce, because you never have too much sauce, right? And a little basil for our garnish. Make it look pretty. And there you go. Let's see how they came out. Oh yeah, I'm just going to give you a little close-up of what that looks like inside. Nice and tender and beautiful and delicious. Let's see how they taste. You see this little vein of Parmesan cheese right there in the middle. Ooh-wee. Very good. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a few things. I hope you get a chance to try my recipe and let me know in the comments how you think it came out. Thank you. Goodbye.